Welcome to this episode of SDI Encounters, a podcast on spiritual direction and spiritual companionship. I'm Anne Lancaster. Thank you for listening. Learn more about our work and the work of spiritual direction and spiritual companionship on our website, sdicompanions.org. In this week's episode, Reverend SeiFu speaks with Matt Whitney on SDI's 2024 online conference. Our conference theme this year is Navigating the Global Dark Night of the Soul of Spiritual Directors and Companions. We will create an opening and a field for spiritual directors and companions to listen and speak into the hardships, struggles, and opportunities we have encountered over the last few difficult years. Unfortunately, the world's circumstances don't seem to be improving, but rather progressively worsening in many ways. So we will need particularly effective tools to address empathy fatigue, burnout, and the very same afflictions that can ail all of us at any time: isolation, loneliness, despair, and loss of meaning and purpose. Join us May 8th through 10th, 2024. Let us come together to listen and share insights, fostering a supportive community to navigate these complex times. Register now at sdicompanions.org.
So, Reverend SeiFu, we just announced our online conference for 2024. It's May 8th through 10th. It's called Spiritual Companioning in the Global Dark Night of the Soul. Can you speak to this theme that participants can expect to explore?
Yeah, so navigating the global dark night of the soul for spiritual directors and companions is the theme of the last 4 years, starting with the pandemic and accelerating through a series of conflicts in the last 4 years. And now in 2024, things seem to be coming to a head. It would be the way I would describe it. And I speak specifically through the prism of spiritual direction and spiritual companionship, where as directors and companions, we tend to nurture and support others as they look for essential meaning, spiritual depth, religious meaning, religious depth with our support. And so these cumulative 4 years have been exhausting for us and for the people we companion in terms of the buildup of stress, the buildup of trauma, and the need to find ways to not just release that trauma and tension, but actually use it to our advantage, use it as the tilling ground, as a fertile breeding ground for spiritual growth.
Wonderful. So there's a lot there. The first thing you said, things are coming to a head, and really since the beginning of the pandemic to now, lots going on in the world. But you said from the perspective of a spiritual companion, or coming to a head in the context of spiritual companionship. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I would say that we are at the turning point. Actually, we may be past the turning point where we have to assume that 2024 is going to be just as stressful, if not more, as the 3 to 4 years that precede this year. And as such, we have to radically change our posture if we're going to be able to not just withstand it the way people withstand natural calamities, hurricanes, earthquakes, but actually thrive through it. And the way to thrive through it is to stand with balance and equanimity, to have mechanisms to constantly recharge our batteries, to tend to ourselves, to help others tend to themselves, the people that we companion, in effective ways with effective tools. So the theme of the conference is really to create a platform where we as a community of spiritual directors and companions can explore those themes, not just intellectually, but experientially, and share with each other best practices, contemplative tools and techniques, spiritual approaches, knowing when to pull back, knowing when to move forward. Those kinds of things are really what's centering not just this conference, but this entire year, and probably beyond it, quite frankly, for our community.
Yeah, so it sounds like more than ever, we need to lean on our spiritual toolkits, our contemplative practices in order to sustain us through difficult times. Am I getting that correct, more or less?
Yeah.
So like you said, we've been doing this as a community. We've been recognizing that times are tough. The 2021 conference was Renaissance. We were just coming out of the pandemic lockdowns, and it feels still like times are hard and stressful. And I don't know, I like to think that we are on like a linear path towards getting better or awakening, you know what I mean, in regards to like these tools finally sort of pouring out into the world. We're sort of waiting for that moment where the tide turns. Do you think that's even possible, or am I missing the point completely?
No, I don't think you are. I think the way that I would look at it is like catching a second wind. This run that we've been on has turned into a marathon. And every good marathon runner knows to pace themselves, to conserve energies, to get through the miles or the kilometers where they're slowing down because their body is catching up with them, and to be able to recharge as they're running the race so that they can finish the run with the state of the world around us and its impact on us spiritually and emotionally, psychologically, obviously, and figuring out ways to sustain ourselves in what has become a marathon of loneliness, of despair, of alienation, of loss, of fracture of the vision, and how to navigate that effectively, right, without shrinking from it. And so I think this conference is an opportunity for us to come together and, with each other's support, stand tall in the face of adversity, stand tall in the face of the onslaught of assaults on our values, on our beliefs, on our compassion, on our empathy, and figure out ways that we can move through it and thrive within it. I think that's the challenge and the opportunity of this moment.
Can you speak to the metaphor you speak about composting, working through our shadow, opening up and being vulnerable so that we can flourish and be healed people in the world? And I know that in this conference, we'll be speaking to personal and collective trauma, working through that shadow. We use a lot of metaphors around here. Maybe speak to the SDI logo and how that represents the journey through darkness.
Yeah, the logo is very relevant to the theme of the conference this year. It represents a path seemingly without end in a dark night full of stars, and an exploration, a spiritual exploration into the beyond, into infinity, to God, into however you might choose to name that impulse and experience and force out there. And I think it's dark and foreboding on the one hand, but another way to look at it is it's an invitation into ultimate meaning and ultimate purpose, into finding ourselves beyond ourselves, into finding ourselves in each other and recognizing our common humanity and our common ultimate meaning and ultimate purpose, which is what we do as spiritual directors and companions, is we find that in ourselves and we help others find that in themselves as well. So I think it's both of it. And some of our keynote speakers this year are experts at speaking into this. The what we call the dark night of the soul is just a step away from awakening and maturity. And that we should look at the crucible that we find ourselves in as the prelude to a breakthrough. The breakdown is a prelude to a breakthrough. It's actually intimately tied. You can't have one without the other. You can't have peace, unfortunately, seemingly, without the war that seems to precede it. We can't have our inner peace, spiritual peace, without processing our traumas and our obstacles and turning them into the building blocks of our spiritual awakening. And so I think this is something that's the paradox built into the dark night of the soul, is that it is actually the necessary step for us to move forward spiritually.
So let's talk about May 8th through 10th. So why is this conference online only? Why aren't we gathering in person or in a hybrid format?
Well, so we want to make it as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. Our in-person conferences are wonderful opportunities, and we'll be having one in 2025 in person and online in Niagara Falls at the end of May. But this year, what we wanted to do is make sure that anyone who wanted to attend could attend. And the easiest way to accomplish that is to make it online. So you don't have the costs of travel. You don't have the costs of the hotels and rooms and board and everything else on top of the registration costs for the conference and associated other costs in terms of managing your schedule. This is an asynchronous event. Everything will be recorded. And so if you're in a different time zone, you can catch up very quickly. You can participate in our various offerings, May 8th through 10th, that way. So it's basically to increase equitable accessibility to the conference to as many people in our network as possible.
What can people expect over the 3 days that we'll be together online?
Well, you can expect wonderful keynote speakers. So we have Barbara Holmes and Kyra Jewel Lingo and others that we will be announcing shortly, who will address us through the prism of trauma and challenge and opportunity, and speak to us directly as spiritual directors and companions to help us notice and grow into the opportunities that lie embedded in these challenges. So we'll have that, and we'll have lots of opportunities for discernment. We are not having workshops this year in the way that we normally do. One of the things that we hear very often, feedback, is that our conferences are very rich, maybe too rich, and that there's not enough opportunity for dialogue and discernment. And so we're being very intentional this year about building lots of space for communal discernment, for group spiritual direction, for one-on-one spiritual direction, for embodiment practices, for music, for rituals, contemplation, as well as being enriched by our keynote speakers and each other. And so this is a spacious conference, contemplatively and steeped in our practices, steep in the practices of deep listening and discernment and mutual discernment, I would say.
So no workshops this year. How can somebody sort of share their gifts as a spiritual companion for this gathering?
So I would say on the workshops issue that the entire conference is a workshop. We don't have discrete workshops. We have one big workshop or hundreds of smaller workshops, depending on how many people actually attend and how we teach each other and support each other and nurture one another. So I would say that it is one big workshop and hundreds of small workshops. That's the way to look at it. We are a learning community, and we pride ourselves in it. All of us, I know we do, because we're constantly taking webinars and courses and educational opportunities, which is what SDI specializes in. And there'll be a lot of opportunity for discernment that way. We also want to celebrate ourselves as a community, and that's why there will be music, there will be embodiment, there will be ritual, there will be time for laughter and tears and processing together. And that's really our intention, is to create an organic container that is a little more spacious and adaptable than the one we usually have.
Okay, so what if I'm not a spiritual companion or even an SDI member? Is this online gathering something that I can attend?
Yes, of course. Of course. This modality is open to anyone who is spiritually minded, wanting to learn and wanting to grow. And I think that describes all of us, whether we follow a particular religious strand or we have a spiritual orientation, whether we're spiritual independents or Christians or Buddhists or Jewish or Muslims or Hindus, Sikhs, etc. We can avail ourselves of this opportunity because it is a spiritual non-container, right? I mean, it's an uncontainer for spirituality, meaning that it's unbound and it's not limited or restricted. So anyone interested in spiritual growth and spiritual development, and in the importance of doing that with others, in a group setting with other companions, other directors are around you to support you. If you join this conference, you'll have many wonderful opportunities to lean into that growth.
Sounds good. I'm ready to sign up. So what does this conference cost and how do I register?
If you sign up for an early bird in the next 30 days, it'll cost you $299. This is 3 days worth of events, and you can save $100 until our early bird deadline expires. And we're giving people plenty of time and opportunity to do that. So we think it's a very good value. We always offer scholarships and encourage those for whom even the price that we've set is too high to apply for a scholarship if you need one. Please do join us. The world is going through a particularly difficult moment, and we need people who are deep water spiritual swimmers like this community is, or if you're interested in the modality of spiritual companionship, to join us. The times require all of us to step up and to be models, not of perfection, because none of us are perfect, but models of determination to keep growing, learning, and working towards making this difficult moment as rich as it can be, knowing that true growth is born out of the paradox of loss and suffering that we're experiencing right now around the world and through so many different conflicts and difficulties that people unfortunately are encountering every day. And so we really need folks to join this movement of spiritual promise and spiritual invitation and spiritual challenge to meet the demands of the day.
If you're enjoying this podcast and you want to help us share and spread the word about the life-giving practice of spiritual companionship, you can help us out by subscribing to this podcast through your favorite app. You could give us a like or even write us a review. Thank you for listening. This is Matt Whitney with Spiritual Directors International. Thanks again for listening. Your time and your presence here are deeply appreciated. If you liked this show and would like us to continue making them, please do subscribe now while it's fresh on your mind. Also, we would love to hear from you, so please feel free to send in your comments and suggestions to the email address podcast@sdiworld.org. SDI is the home of spiritual companionship. Learn more about us and our work on our website, sdicompanions.org.